As strikes once again spread across Iran, from oil workers to teachers and truckers, it's worth remembering that these are not isolated outbursts. They are part of a long, unfinished struggle. Understanding the history of Iran's labor movements, how they rose, how they were betrayed, and how they endured, gives deeper meaning to today's protests. August 1953, the streets of Tehran erupt in chaos as a foreign-backed coup topples Iran's popular Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. Amid the turmoil, the hopes of a nation's workers hang in the balance. This was more than a power struggle of politicians. It was a breaking point for the labor movement.
The return of the Shah. Mossadegh and his government were swept from power in favor of General Zahedi, the man appointed by the Shah in the first place. The thoughts of Britain instinctively turned to Abadan, that monument to British enterprise and engineering skill. Forced to abandon what we had created in the wilderness, is it too much to hope that we shall see once more the tankers of Britain at Abadan?
In the oil fields of Abadan and the factories of Tehran, ordinary workers who had fought for national control of oil and workplace dignity suddenly faced a dark turn in history. The CIA and MI6 orchestrated coup didn't just oust a democratic elected leader, it crushed the burgeoning dream of social justice. The strikes that once fueled the nationalization of oil echo powerfully today, from the petrochemical plants of Khuzestan to the classrooms and highways of Iran. Workers continue to rise up against economic injustice, repression, and state violence. The demands may look different, but at their core, they reflect the same struggle. What has changed is not the nature of the class struggle, but the name and face of those who suppress it. The oppression faced by Iranians today is not simply a product of the past 4 decades, it is a continuation of a 70-year legacy. Since the 1953 coup dismantled Iran's democratic aspirations and shattered its labor movements, successive regimes have maintained a cycle of repression, from the Shah's SAVAK to the Islamic Republic security apparatus that took down the factory Shoras. The methods have evolved, but the goals remain the same: silence dissent, crush labor, and hold on to power. To understand the coup's impact, we must step back to the 1940s, when Iran's labor movement was coming alive. After Reza Shah's abdication in 1941, political prisoners were released, independent unions began to emerge, and leftist groups, most notably the Tudeh party, quickly gained influence. In factories and oil fields, workers organized bold strikes demanding fair wages, safer working conditions, and control over their nation's resources. Nowhere was this rising power more visible than in Abadan, home to the world's largest oil refinery. In April 1951, as Parliament moved to nationalize oil, Tudeh-led strikes mobilized tens of thousands to protest low wages, squalid housing, and British imperial control. Workers across Tehran, Isfahan, and northern provinces joined in, making labor an undeniable political force. By the early 1950s, the Tudeh party had grown into one of the most powerful mass movements in Iranian history, with over 100,000 official members and hundreds of thousands of sympathizers. Ranging from factory workers and oil technicians to teachers and intellectuals, it played a central role in organizing unions across key industries, particularly in oil and transport. But its influence reached beyond the shop floor. Through a covert network of military sympathizers, later dubbed the Tudeh Military Network, the party had embedded itself within the armed forces. Declassified CIA documents would later describe this network as a state within a state, striking fear into both the monarchy and its foreign backers. Yet, the Tudeh was not alone. Other leftist forces also shaped the pre-coup political landscape. The Iran Party, aligned with Mossadegh's National Front, promoted democratic socialism. The Workers' Union, the Central Council of Federated Trade Unions, and various Marxist and anarcho-syndicalist circles in Tehran and provincial towns gave voice to the growing working class. Together, these groups posed a formidable challenge, not just to foreign oil interests, but to the very foundations of autocracy and capitalism in Iran. By 1951, this momentum climaxed in a national triumph. Iran nationalized British-controlled Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. It was a momentous victory driven by worker organizing. An iconic image from 1951 shows a solitary oil worker brandishing a flame torch, standing defiant against colonial oil bosses. The old worker, immortalized on the front page of a pro-Mossadegh newspaper, became the face of national resistance, proof that ordinary laborers could help reclaim Iran's sovereignty. To many Iranian workers, oil nationalization wasn't just economic policy, it was a promise of dignity, a sense that those sweating in refineries and factories would finally share in their nation's wealth. Before the oil nationalization of 1951, working conditions in Iran's factories and refineries, especially in the British-controlled Abadan complex, were defined by exploitation and racialized inequality. Iranian laborers toiled long hours in sweltering conditions for meager wages, with little access to healthcare, job security, or housing. Meanwhile, British employees lived in segregated compounds with superior pay, housing, and amenities. Iranian workers were banned from certain facilities and subjected to blatant discrimination, often addressed only as quote-unquote native labor. But with the nationalization of oil under Mossadegh, that structure began to shift. Wages increased, though be it modestly. Iranian technicians were promoted, and more critically, workers felt a surge of pride and ownership over their labor. No longer mere subjects of a foreign empire, they became defenders of national sovereignty. Labor unions gained strength, and strikes were treated not as a rebellion, but as participation in shaping the nation's future. The celebration was, however, short-lived. On August 19, 1953, chaos engulfed Tehran. Tanks rolled in and mobs swarmed the streets. Declassified CIA documents later revealed that the agency hired some of the most feared gangsters in Tehran to stage riots supporting the Shah. In the mayhem, between 200 and 300 people were killed. The coup, known in Iran as 28th of Mordad, the month it happened in the Iranian calendar, succeeded in toppling Mossadegh's elected government. The young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had briefly fled, returned. With the Shah's return came fury and fear. His new regime wasted no time unleashing a sweeping crackdown. In Tehran's alleys and Abadan's workers' districts, the knock on the door at midnight became a terrifying routine. Thousands of political dissidents were arrested within weeks. Especially targeted were the Tudeh party organizers and union leaders who had powered the labor movement. Tudeh agitators have been banished or shut up, a smug British official reported of Khuzestan, Iran's oil province, soon after, implying that labor's leading voices were either exiled or jailed. The new prime minister, General Zahedi, backed by CIA money, outlawed independent unions. Military courts sentenced worker activists as traitors. Mossadegh himself, the symbol of Iranian independence, was dragged into a military tribunal, convicted of treason, and imprisoned. After the 1953 coup, the Foreign Oil Consortium returned. Iranian workers were once again subordinated to foreign managers, and the labor movement was violently crushed. Independent unions were banned, leaders imprisoned or exiled, and wages stagnated under the eye of the Shah's secret police. What had briefly been a movement towards equality became a tightly surveilled labor regime, where silence was survival and dignity was deferred. Iran's brief democratic spring was over, but not for the last time. In its place, the Shah, now posing as a monarch, but in reality a military dictator, established his regime, propped up by elite support from inside and Western money. The independent press was silenced. Opposition parties were banned or rendered impotent, and for the industrial working class and the salaried middle class, the coup slammed shut the door to any legitimate political voice. Factories felt eerily quiet of labor agitation. The message from the palace was clear: fall in line or face the consequences. In the decades after 1953, Iran's oil continued to flow, now under a new consortium agreement that welcomed back British, American, and other Western companies. The Shah basked in oil revenues and pursued grand modernization schemes, but beneath the gleaming veneer of progress, Iran's workers toiled under an iron grip. The Shah's secret police, SAVAK, infiltrated every factory and union hall. Any whisper or collective organizing or socialist ideas was snuffed out. According to historical records, SAVAK extended its control over all professional associations, trade unions included, allowing only state-supervised yellow unions that towed the regime's line. Union meetings often included a silent quote-unquote observer with a notepad and a gun at his hip. Under these conditions, whatever unions existed were emptied of real power. Strikes became rare and extremely risky, yet despite the repression, discontent smoldered. The Shah tried to buy loyalty with limited reforms, a quote-unquote white revolution in the 1960s that offered profit-sharing bonuses to industrial workers and land to some peasants. But the fundamentals didn't change. Wages lagged while costs rose, and independent labor activism remained essentially outlawed. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Iran underwent rapid industrial growth. The urban working class swelled fivefold as millions migrated from impoverished villages to cities in search of jobs. These new urban workers carried with them simmering frustrations and new ideas for revolution. The White Revolution, launched by the Shah in the 1960s, did bring about rapid modernization, but in a way that intensified Iran's social and economic inequalities. Land reform programs meant to break up large estates often left peasants with plots too small to survive on, pushing millions into urban centers where they became part of an unregulated, underpaid workforce. Tehran, Shiraz, and Tabriz swelled with migrant workers living in makeshift housing without basic infrastructure. Meanwhile, industrial development concentrated wealth in the hands of royal cronies, foreign firms, and a technocratic elite tied to the state. While flashy highways, factories, and shopping centers gave the illusion of progress, the majority of Iranians face inflation, job insecurity, and political repression. This uneven development, modernization without equality, created the very social tensions that would explode in the revolution of 1979. By 1978, that discontent ignited. Decades of silence gave way to collective roar. Iranian labor, long suppressed, emerged as a decisive force in the brewing revolution. In the oil sector, the lifeblood of Iran's economy, workers found their courage. They staged waves of strikes that autumn, slowing and then halting oil production. Abadan's refinery workers, once defeated in 1953, now stood at the forefront of national strikes that paralyzed the Shah's regime. Factory workers in Tehran, bus drivers, electricians, all joined in. Despite SAVAK's pervasive terror, the workers knew the regime was staggering, and they seized the moment. One foreign correspondent observed that Iran's oil workers had the regime's jugular vein in their hands, and they squeezed. In February 1979, the Shah fell, and Iran's monarchy crumbled. In the euphoric days that followed, workers rushed to claim their long-denied rights. They formed Shoras, workers' councils in factories, oil fields, and offices across the country. These grassroots councils managed production, demanded back pay, ousted abusive bosses, and for a brief, hopeful moment, gave workers direct control over their workplaces and the economy. In oil refineries and textile mills, decisions were made collectively. The spirit of democracy from below surged through the country. It felt as if the dreams deferred in 1953 had finally been reborn. A slogan captured the moment: "This time, the workers shall not be silent." Many of these shoras were influenced directly or indirectly by Iran's vibrant leftist tradition. The Tudeh party, Fadai guerrillas, and other Marxist organizations offered ideological frameworks, organizational strategies, and a vision of worker-led socialism. While not all shoras were partisan, the revolutionary momentum gave space for radical politics to flourish. Debates over class struggle, nationalization, and democratic planning were no longer theoretical. They played out on the factory floor. But the silence returned. The newly established Islamic Republic, initially embraced by many on the left, soon turned against the independent workers' movement. What began as a popular revolution gave way to state repression. Shoras were dismantled systematically and replaced by state-sanctioned Islamic associations, loyal to the clerical establishment. Workers who had risked everything were now labeled counter-revolutionaries. Strikes were criminalized, dissident newspapers were shut down, and factory gates, once decorated with banners of solidarity, were guarded by rifles. If you're interested more about this time period and how the Islamic Republic achieved this, I will be making another video following this one to explain this further. The betrayal was not just ideological though, it was also geopolitical. As part of its Cold War strategy, the United States pursued what became known as the Green Belt Doctrine, bolstering Islamic movements to act as bulwarks against Soviet influence. Iran, revolutionary but also anti-Soviet, fit the vision for the US. In early 1979, US General Robert Heuser was quietly dispatched to Tehran, not to save the Shah, but to coordinate his exit and ensure that the military would not side with the secular left. Soon after, the new regime did what the monarchy had failed to fully achieve. It dismantled the organized left. In August 1979, under the guise of restoring order, Islamist forces attacked leftist offices and violently crushed militant Shoras. Newspapers advocating for workers' rights were shuttered. By 1983, with CIA assistance, the Islamic Republic outlawed even pro-government labor councils and dismantled the Tudeh party once more. Its leaders arrested, tortured, or executed. It's worth mentioning that the names and identities of these activists was given to the Iranian government by the CIA. The tactics of intimidation, surveillance, and repression that had decimated labor in 1953 were revived, now in the name of revolution. As internal repression escalated, Iranian workers were thrust into yet another battlefield. In 1980, Saddam Hussein, armed with Western weapons and backed by US allies, invaded Iran, launching a brutal 8-year war. It was a war where the poor and dispossessed of Iraq were sent to kill the poor and dispossessed of Iran. While hundreds of thousands of working-class soldiers perished, the elites in both countries entrenched their rule. The real war, that of class war, was buried beneath the bombs, and the ruling powers, East and West, ensured it remained buried. In its final act against the working class and those fighting for democracy in Iran, in the summer of 1988, the Islamic Republic carried out one of the darkest episodes in its history, the mass execution of thousands of political prisoners, ordered by Ayatollah Khomeini and carried out in secret. The victims were primarily leftist, including members of the Tudeh party, Fadayan, and the MEK, many of whom had already served their sentences or were nearing release. In just a few months, prison yards across the country turned into mass graves. Bodies were buried in unmarked pits and families were never told where their loved ones lay. To this day, the Iranian state has refused to acknowledge the full scale of the killings, what survivors and human rights groups rightfully called a crime against humanity. The 1953 coup was a devastating blow. It echoed through generations, teaching Iran's rulers the cruel effectiveness of crushing worker solidarity. Yet it also taught Iran's workers the value of unity and resistance. From the refinery strikers of 1951 to the oil contract workers of today blocking roads in Asaluye, the struggle lives on. Each time a regime uses the playbook of repression, whether the Shah's monarchy or the Islamic regime, Iranian labor finds new ways to defy it, keeping alive the flame first lit in the battle for oil nationalization. Today, now in its third week, a sweeping nationwide trucker strike is shaking Iran's transport sector and gaining broad public support. Since May 22nd, tens of thousands of drivers have stopped hauling freight, lifting their hands from the wheel and raising them in defiance. What began in the southern port city of Bandar Abbas has now spread to more than 160 cities across all 30 provinces, making it one of the largest and most coordinated labor actions in recent Iranian history. The legacy of the fight for dignity, democracy, and control over the economy lives on. Please like and subscribe to see the second video of this series, where we will be diving to see how the Islamic Republic exactly managed to defeat the workers after the 1979 revolution.